Hi everybody. I've been reading a book about Harriet Tubman. It's called The Road to Freedom, written by Catherine Clinton. Chapter 6 is called the Moses of Her People. Now there's a lot more information in the chapter, but here's some things that I just picked out to share with you about the chapter. Harriet's niece is about to be sold. The word got back to Harriet, who had already freed herself in Philly. This was December of 1850. So Harriet knew that it was going to be very dangerous going back into Maryland. It says any black traveling by boat, train, or public transportation had to show free papers. It says a guy named John Bowley snuggled Kizzy out and her children into a boat into Delaware, and then they got to Harriet. Harriet was able to guide her niece and her children to freedom, and she did this because her niece Kizzy was going to be sold further south, which in those days, the further south you got, Harriet, it is believed that the worse the slaves got treated. She took her second trip to Maryland in 1851. She rescued one of her brothers and two co-workers. She connected with a man named Thomas Garrett. He had a Delaware Underground Railroad operation that went from Delaware to Philly, different networks. Her third rescue was very risky. She wanted to go back to the plantation where she was originally escaped from, and to get her husband. So she went back. When she got there, she found out that her husband had married another woman. Her name was Caroline. And she still tried to convince him to go because she had visions of her and her husband being together again. Her husband would not leave. It says that Harriet actually took this very hard. This hurt Harriet a lot, caused a lot of disappointment for her. After her third trip, she wondered why me? Why me, Lord? Why am I the one? Why not somebody else to be the one to go get slaves and free slaves? And she says she heard a voice, and the Lord told her, "It's you I want." In 1851, Harriet committed to being part of the Underground Railroad. She took 11 people with her and started to go to Canada. Once her husband didn't want to go on her third rescue, she didn't want to go back empty-handed. So she took 11 people with her, and then she took them all the way to Canada. She became an official conductor on the Underground Railroad. It says that most of the time, Harriet chose to travel alone, and people started to kind of look at her like as a Moses. Starting in 1852, she took a trip or two a year through Wilmington or Philly. Every time she took a trip, it says she freed about 10 slaves a year, 10 to 20 slaves a year. Her trips were mostly to the back roads, and she never traveled by day. She always, they rested during the day, they moved at night. They hid in the woods. People on the Underground Railroad had barns and stuff from the hide, things like that. They can get rest. She was able to gain money for her trips as a cook and a domestic. In 1853, she went to Maryland. She took another trip there. She tried to travel the frequently traveled train routes, they call them. Most people looked at her as a celebrity. When she came to stops in the Underground Railroad and she would take a rest, people would bring her in. They enjoyed listening to her stories and what she had to say about her journeys and things like that. She rarely went back to the plantations. She rarely went on the actual plantations herself. She would go to the towns where there were plantations at, and she would spread word to people who might be wanting to escape, giving them places that she wanted them to meet at, the time she wanted to meet at. Sometimes she would be deceptive, give the wrong place, things like that. Harriet, they said in the book that she really couldn't read. She really couldn't read or write. So what she had was a collection of photos of Underground Railroad people who were involved with it. And sometimes if people would question her, or people who she thought were questionable along the way, she would pull out some of these pictures and say, hey, do you know who this person is, or do you know that person is? And if they didn't know, she wouldn't take any advice from them, or she wouldn't give any information to them. She always had some type of costume. She used costumes a lot. She used gospel music and song as signals. Sometimes if she knew slaves were waiting on her, she would walk down the street in disguise, but then she would start singing like a certain gospel song. And people knew that when they heard that song, that was her way of letting them know that it was her. It says that Saturday evening was a popular evening for Harriet, because most of the slaves were off on Sunday, so the slave owner wasn't really looking for them. And the slave owner knew they were going to leave the plantation to go see family members, things like that. So she would take them on Saturday night, or early Sunday morning, and then that way they could be gone all day, and it wouldn't be noticed till Monday that they were gone. Harriet believed in absolute discipline. When she had a certain way you had to act on her missions back with her. If you didn't, she wasn't opposed to using force or threatening or things like that to make you understand that she meant business. There was one time when I read where there was a slave who got scared on the way, and he wanted to go back, and he wasn't going to move. He was going to go back because he felt safer he's going to take his chances on the plantation. Says she always carried a revolver with her, and she put the revolver to his head and told him, you're either going to move or you're going to die. And she did that because she was afraid that he would go back and tell and give their whereabouts and destroy the whole, ruin for everybody. One of her favorite scriptures was Psalm 32:8. It says that she was unable to endure intense pain. On one of her trips, she had an infection in her mouth because she had a tooth that was rotten or whatever, something like that. It says she took a gun and just took the butt of the gun and just knocked the handle and just kind of hammered it out of her own mouth to relieve herself. She got help from Quakers along the way, talked about in the chapter. Once a family member escaped, she says that she noticed that once one family member escaped, that usually inspired other family members to escape also. In the state of Maryland back then, they required all blacks to have free papers if they were leaving the state by boat or railway. Thomas Garrett, once again another person who worked on the Underground Railroad, he indicated that Harriet didn't seem to understand how important what she was doing. Like she thought it wasn't really that serious or that big of a deal, but he would try to explain to her how big of a deal what she was doing was. At one point, Harriet was able to rescue 3 of her brothers. It tells the story of her parents still being on the plantation, and when she came back and let her brothers know that she was going to rescue, she actually blindfolded her parents because she knew that they were going to have to be left behind, and if they were questioned, they didn't want the father or mother to be able to say, well, I did see my daughter. They actually never saw her because they were blindfolded. So that was chapter 6 of the book, The Road to Freedom. It's about Harriet Tubman. It's written by Catherine Clinton, and the chapter is called The Moses of Her People. Thank you.